Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. The lake air hit different after a week away. Work had sent me to Boston. Just a quick trip, site visit, nothing out of the ordinary. I left Lindsay with a stocked fridge, fresh-cut firewood, and a reminder to take it easy. She'd been a little off lately, quieter, distracted, but I chalked it up to stress. Spring's always hectic for her at the boutique, with prom season and wedding orders piling up. Still, something didn't sit right. I'd mentioned staying an extra night, and her reaction was weird. She paused mid-toast that morning, like she had to recalculate something. "Oh, okay," she said, too neutral, too fast. I shrugged it off at the time. Now I wish I hadn't. Coming back, the house smelled like lavender and lemon. Too clean. The dog's bed was freshly fluffed, and her shoes weren't by the door. She always kicked them off there. I stood at the threshold, backpack still slung over one shoulder, listening. Nothing. Just whine through the screen porch. Then a faint creak from upstairs. "Lindsay," I called. No response. Just as I reached the stairs, she came out of the bathroom in a robe, hair wet. "Oh, you're back early." She smiled, but her eyes didn't match. "Yeah, caught the earlier ferry." She nodded, pulled her robe tighter. "I just showered. Long day." We didn't hug. No kiss. Just a pat on the shoulder as she passed me to head downstairs. I try not to overthink it. She was tired. I was tired. But later that night, when I unloaded the car, I realized something strange. My GoPro case was zipped open in the back seat. I hadn't used it on the trip. I barely remembered packing it. My buddy Kyle had asked to borrow it for a fishing video a couple weeks ago and returned it before I left. Maybe I left it that way. Still, something told me to check the memory card. I waited until Lindsay went to bed. Poured myself a whiskey. Plugged in the camera. Most of the footage was what I expected. Old clips of kayaking, snowboarding, called goofing around. Then a folder labeled Untitled_02. I opened it. There were 6 files. The first was shaky, just Kyle's face. Then it shifted and my heart dropped. Lindsay, in a hoodie, laughing, holding a beer. The cabin in the background, Kyle's cabin, the one he'd inherited from his uncle, about 20 minutes out of town, right on a no-name pond. My thumb hovered over the trackpad. I clicked the next file. Her voice, clear as a bell. "This stays between us, okay?" Kyle's laugh. "Always." I didn't need more. I watched anyway. There was no mistaking it. The flirty glances, the way she touched his arm, the fact that it was filmed at all. Careless. Bold. Like they thought the world couldn't touch them. I sat back in my chair and stared at the dark screen. No yelling. No breaking things. Just a cold quiet that settled into my chest like a long Maine winter. I didn't confront her that night. I let her sleep. Instead, I sat by the fireplace and thought. About Kyle, my best friend since middle school. About Lindsay, who once promised me forever. About Haley, Lindsay's younger sister, who once had a crush on me so obvious it made every Thanksgiving awkward. I remember the journal. The one I found in the attic years ago when we moved in. Haley's. I never read more than a page. I tossed it in a storage bin and forgot it existed. But now I was starting to wonder why Lindsay went nuclear after finding it 2 weeks ago. She'd storm around the house, said Haley was creepy and obsessed, then never brought it up again. I took a deep breath and opened my laptop. The truth wasn't going anywhere, but neither was I. Not until I figured out exactly who had betrayed who first, and what to do with that information once I did. The next morning, I played it cool. Lindsay made coffee like nothing had happened, humming as she poured mine and slid it across the counter. I thanked her with a nod, watching the steam rise, watching her avoid eye contact. I didn't flinch when she mentioned needing to swing by Kyle's place later to pick up some old books she'd lent him. The audacity almost made me laugh. She'd barely mentioned Kyle before. Now suddenly she had errands there? I held my tongue. Let her dig deeper. Later that afternoon, when she left, I went straight to the attic. I dug through the plastic bins until I found it. Haley's old journal. It was right where I'd left it years ago, the leather cover worn and dusty. I flipped through it, feeling like a thief, but something told me Lindsay's anger over it wasn't random. Sure enough, midway through, there it was. Haley's handwriting, soft and slanted, describing how she'd always looked up to me, how she had feelings she knew weren't right, but couldn't help. I closed it gently. There was no scandal here. Just a young girl, years younger back then, working through a teenage crush. Nothing to justify what Lindsay was doing. Unless she wanted it to be a justification. I was still mulling it over when I spotted the gift bag. Stuffed behind a stack of winter clothes, a small, neatly wrapped box with a card tucked beneath the ribbon. I opened it carefully. Inside was a leather bracelet with a tiny engraved compass. The card read, "So you always find your way back to me." Ed. My stomach tightened. The handwriting wasn't meant for me. I'd never worn jewelry, and Lindsay knew it. I stared at the bracelet, rage bubbling under the surface, but I steadied myself. Anger could wait. Strategy couldn't. I thought about smashing it, throwing it into the woods, but I stopped myself. Instead, I got creative. I rummaged through my old workshop gear and found my metal stamps. I added a second engraving, subtle but clear when you knew where to look. Property of EM. My initials buried inside the leather. Anyone looking wouldn't see it unless they really inspected it. Satisfied, I boxed it back up, retied the ribbon, and slid it back into the attic. When Lindsay returned later that evening, she was all smiles. Too much. She joked about Kyle giving her an old photo album from his late uncle's cabin. I played dumb. Nice of him, I said. I didn't mention the bracelet. Didn't mention the footage. I didn't even mention Haley's journal. I want to see how far she'd go. Over the next few days, I watched her closely. She wasn't exactly discreet. Phone face down more than usual, late-night inventory, runs for the boutique, sudden interest in hiking solo. She even asked if I'd mind her going on a weekend self-care trip to Kyle's cabin. "It's just peaceful up there," she said. Helped clear my head. The way she said it made my skin crawl. But I smiled. "Of course. You deserve it." What she didn't know was that I had already called Kyle's uncle's old caretaker, an older guy named Wade who still did odd jobs for the family. Wade told me flat out that Kyle wasn't the only one up there lately. "Thought you'd know," he said. "Your wife's been up there more than him." That night, Lindsay packed her bag while I helped fold laundry. She kissed my cheek and said, "Thanks for trusting me." I nearly laughed. Trust? She didn't know I had already installed a spare trail cam near the cabin last summer, mostly to watch for bears, but fully capable of catching a cheating spouse if needed. I hadn't even remembered it until Wade jogged my memory. As soon as she left, I drove to Wade's, grabbed the memory card, and loaded the footage at home. What I saw made me grip the desk until my knuckles turned white. There she was parking, waiting. Minutes later, Kyle's truck pulled up. They weren't careful. They weren't subtle. They embraced like they'd been doing it for months. The bracelet? Right there on Kyle's wrist. I leaned back, letting the anger settle, hardening like ice. The proof was undeniable now, but it wasn't enough to just catch them. No, if Lindsay wanted to lie this deep, then she could sit comfortably in her web a little longer. I wasn't about to blow it yet. I wanted more. I wanted the full picture. And if I played this right, I'd get it. The next few days were a masterclass in pretending. I acted like the same old Mark, the husband who trusted, the man who believed every word that left Lindsay's mouth, no matter how thin the excuses got. She returned from her self-care weekend, glowing, like she'd actually found inner peace. She kissed me on the cheek, dropped her bag by the door, and started rambling about how fresh the lake air had been. I just smiled and nodded, pretending I didn't notice the bracelet was now missing from her wrist. I knew exactly where it was. On Kyle. I wanted to push, to confront, but instinct told me to hold back. Something was off. Too off. She was playing a role, but so was I. And if I had learned anything from the footage, it was that Lindsay didn't think I was even watching the same movie. Midweek, we had dinner with some old friends. Lindsay insisted we go, as if clinging to normalcy would patch up whatever she thought might be fraying. At the table, surrounded by familiar faces, I watched her giggle at stories she didn't usually find funny, rub my arm like she still cared, and lean into me with a theatrical sweetness I hadn't seen in months. To everyone else, we probably looked like the perfect couple. But under the table, my hands were clenched, forcing myself not to react. And then, just as the waitress refilled our drinks and walked Kyle. He wasn't supposed to be there. Not with us, anyway. But sure enough, he slid into a booth across the room with his brother. Lindsay stiffened. It was barely a second, but I caught it. That slight panic before she blinked it away and leaned even closer to me, as if doubling down on the performance. I played along, leaning back and pulling her chair closer like an affectionate husband might. But inside, my mind was spinning. Later that night, back at home, I brought up Kyle casually. "Did you know Kyle was going to be there?" I asked, eyes fixed on hers. She barely flinched. "Oh no, total coincidence," she said too quickly. "Funny, right?" I nodded. "Funny," I echoed. Over the next few days, I started planting little traps. Nothing obvious, just enough to test her. I mentioned how I might swing by Kyle's to borrow some tools. Her response was sharper than I expected. "Why him? Don't you have your own?" she said, nearly biting the words. I shrugged. Just figured. Then came the fake errand. I left early one morning, telling her I had to help Wade fix a busted pipe out by the cabins. I doubled back 2 hours later and parked a few houses down, watching from afar as Kyle's truck rolled up her driveway. I stayed hidden, my chest pounding. Kyle wasn't even trying to hide it now. The two of them disappeared inside, blinds pulled, curtains drawn. I gripped the steering wheel until my fingers went numb. Every instinct screamed at me to storm in and blow it all apart. But something still didn't add up. It wasn't just Lindsay and Kyle sneaking around. There was something in Lindsay's behavior. Something desperate, not just reckless. I didn't fully understand it, but I knew I had to wait. I watched the house until Kyle left hours later, slipping out like a teenager sneaking past curfew. When I returned home that evening, Lindsay acted like nothing happened. "How was the cabin?" she asked, stirring a pot of soup. "Quiet," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. That night, I went through Lindsay's phone, not outright, just a glance when she left it on the counter during a shower. Locked tight. New passcode. She never used to have one. I noted it without reacting. A part of me, the part that loved her, kept hoping this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Maybe Kyle was helping her with some surprise for me. An anniversary plan? A gesture I wasn't supposed to know about. I was grasping. I knew better. But I wanted, desperately, to be wrong. The next morning, as if fate itself enjoyed twisting the knife, I caught a glimpse of Kyle pulling away from the house again, while Lindsay stood by the front door waving goodbye, as if nothing was happening behind closed doors. When she turned and saw me watching from the porch, she didn't even flinch. She smiled. "Oh, Kyle just dropped off some stuff for the retreat," she said sweetly. "You know, helping Haley get everything organized." That's when it clicked. Haley. Lindsay had been throwing Haley's name into conversations like seasoning. The youth retreat, the church, the family cabin. She'd used my sister-in-law like a human shield, banking on my guilt about the journal, about Haley's old feelings, to keep me distracted. But I wasn't distracted anymore, and I wasn't buying it. I didn't say a word about Kyle or the retreat the next few days, but I didn't let it go either. I watched, collected, and waited. Every time Lindsay mentioned Haley, I paid closer attention. My gut told me Haley was being used as a cover story, and it was working until now. Haley had always been cautious, guarded even, especially around Lindsay. She wasn't the type to plan church retreats, and yet Lindsay dropped her name every time she left the house lately. I figured it was time to visit Haley myself. I stopped by her place one afternoon with a cooler of fresh-caught trout and a six-pack, claiming I wanted to catch up. Haley seemed surprised, but welcomed me in. As we sat on her porch watching the lake shimmer under the late sun, I casually asked about the retreat. "How's the youth retreat shaping up?" I asked, trying to sound offhand. She blinked, confused. "Retreat? There's no retreat this year, Mark. Budget got cut months ago. Didn't Lindsay tell you?" My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression blank. Must have slipped her mind," I said, swallowing the bitter taste rising in my throat. Haley went on. "We were supposed to have one, but without the funds, we canceled. Honestly, I'm kind of glad. We've been swamped enough." So there it was. Confirmation. Every late night, every errand, every excuse wrapped around the retreat had been fiction. My heart raced, but I nodded, sipped my beer, and acted like nothing had shifted. Haley had no clue the weight of what she'd just handed me. That evening, when Lindsay came home chirping about the next retreat meeting, I could hardly contain my disbelief. She was fully committed to the lie. "Haley's doing a great job," she said, setting grocery bags on the counter. I replied with a simple, "Yeah." She mentioned it's been a lot, and watched her carefully. Not a flicker of guilt crossed her face. Instead of confronting her, I decided to get smarter. I installed a subtle app on our home computer that mirrored her phone backups. She never used the desktop anymore, so it was perfect. If she so much as texted Kyle, I'd know. Days passed. Lindsay grew more comfortable, thinking I had accepted the lies. Meanwhile, I watched messages flow in like clockwork. "Meet you after church?" Kyle texted one night. Lindsay replied, "Same place." My blood boiled, but I stayed quiet. I started tracing the pattern. Every Tuesday and Friday, she left for choir practice or youth planning. Each time, Kyle's texts matched the schedule. The church basement, the docks behind Kyle's cabin, even the public library parking lot, late at night. They thought they were clever. Then came the night that nearly pushed me over the edge. I watched from a distance as Lindsay, under the cover of a rainy night, hopped into Kyle's truck outside the corner gas station. They didn't see me tucked behind the line of trees. I followed at a distance as they wound through the back roads, finally stopping in an old bait-and-tackle shop that I knew hadn't been open in years. They disappeared inside without hesitation. I could have walked right up, but I didn't. I sat there, soaked from the rain, staring at the darkened building. I thought about kicking down the door, dragging them both out, demanding answers. But instead, I waited. Waited because I knew a messy explosion wasn't justice. It was just noise. I wanted precision. When Lindsay returned home that night, hair wet from the rain, she acted like nothing had happened. Choir ran late. She mumbled, avoiding eye contact. I helped her out of her coat like a gentleman, knowing full well where she'd really been. By the next morning, I had enough information to move forward. The app had backed up photos. Grainy, sure, but obvious enough. Kyle's hand on Lindsay's waist. A shot of them clinking beers inside the old shop. One video, short but undeniable, showed Lindsay whispering to him before laughing and pulling him by the hand. The final puzzle piece. Still, I played dumb. The next Sunday, I invited Lindsay to join me for a family lunch at the lake. She agreed, smiling like the loving wife she pretended to be. As we drove, she chatted about church and how Haley wanted her help with some upcoming event. I nodded, noting every word. We arrived, and there was Haley already setting up. I caught her eye and gave the smallest nod. She didn't know the full story yet, but soon enough, she would. For now, I just needed to make sure Lindsay kept thinking she was ahead of me. As we unloaded the cooler and fishing poles, Lindsay excused herself, saying she had to make a quick call about the retreat. I watched her walk toward the woods, probably texting Kyle. My pulse was steady now. No panique. No die. Just cold certainty. I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew. It was a Wednesday when I finally accepted there was no more room for doubt. The evidence had piled too high, stacked like cordwood, waiting for a match. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee going cold, scrolling through every synced message, blurry picture, and timestamp location pinned to Kyle's cabin and the old bait shop. Every pattern was clear as day now. Tuesdays and Fridays were no accident, and neither were the quiet weekends when Lindsay claimed she was helping Haley prep for a fictional retreat. She wasn't just cheating, she was orchestrating it with the precision of someone who had done this before. I wasn't just angry. I was insulted. Did she really think I wouldn't notice? That I'd just keep nodding like some clueless husband, smiling at every hollow excuse? I thought about confronting her then, laying it all on the table, but the thought passed as quickly as it came. I wanted more. I needed the full picture, no half-truths or flustered denials. I wanted her caught beyond any escape. That night, Lindsay came home humming to herself, tossing her keys into the bowl like she hadn't just been out at that old bait shop again. I watched her move about the house, noting every little detail, the way she avoided my eyes, how her phone never left her pocket anymore, how she skipped setting the dinner table like she used to. Something in her demeanor had shifted. She was getting bold, comfortable, and that told me the affair wasn't slowing down. It was heating up. The next morning, I took a detour on my way to work and drove past Kyle's place. His truck was gone. No surprise there. But I noticed a small detail that made my stomach turn. a second set of tire tracks leading down the trail behind the cabin, cutting through the muddy path like it had been used more than once. When I returned home that evening, Lindsay was already on the porch, acting like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Hey, babe," she said, flashing a grin. "Thinking about making that chicken casserole you like tonight." I forced a smile. "Sounds great." Inside, I could barely keep still. My mind was racing, but I had to play it cool. The game wasn't finished yet. Later that night, while Lindsay showered, I took the opportunity to check her phone. Locked. Of course. It hadn't been before. I stood there, staring at it on the bathroom counter, realizing she had taken every precaution now that the affair was likely in full swing. What she didn't know was that I didn't need the phone. I already had the cloud backup, quietly feeding me everything. Still, the lock screen was a silent admission that she was hiding something. The next day, I made a decision. I left work early and drove straight to Kyle's cabin, parking far enough away to stay unseen. I hiked the rest of the way through the woods, moving slow, careful not to snap a branch or crunch leaves underfoot. As I approached the clearing, I spotted them. Lindsay's car tucked behind the cabin and Kyle's truck parked haphazardly like they were in a hurry. I didn't need to get closer to know what was happening inside. The quiet woods carried sound well, and though I couldn't make out words, the laughter and muffled voices were enough. My pulse remained steady, strangely calm now that I was seeing it unfold for real. I backed away, blending into the woods until I reached my truck. Sitting behind the wheel, I clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even shocked. I was calculating. If they wanted to play games, I was ready to change the rules. That night, Lindsay returned home, talking about how Haley wanted to meet this weekend for another planning session. I nodded, letting her think I was still in the dark. "Tell Haley I said hi," I said, watching as Lindsay's eyes flickered for just a second, a flash of guilt or fear. I couldn't tell which. But it was enough. I knew then I wasn't far from the finish line. I wasn't just gathering clues anymore. I was watching a house of cards sway in the wind, and all I needed was one more push to make it fall. The next time she left, I wouldn't just follow. I'd be ready, and when I did, it wouldn't be to confront her with anger. It would be to end it on my terms. The following Saturday was colder than usual for spring, the kind of chill that sneaks under your collar and settles in your bones. I stood at the window, sipping burnt coffee, watching Lindsay load the car with an overnight bag and a duffel she tried to hide under a blanket. She caught me looking and gave a forced smile. "It's just clothes for the retreat," she said. "Haley wants to practice the skits we planned." I nodded like the fool she thought I was, but inside, every part of me burned hotter than that cheap coffee. I let her go without a word, watched her taillights disappear down the long driveway, and then grabbed my coat and the keys. I didn't follow her right away. I wasn't about to walk into the same trap I'd seen other guys in town stumble into, caught red-faced yelling in the middle of some lover's hideaway. No, I wanted more than a confrontation. I wanted certainty, and after the weeks I'd spent piecing it together, I knew where they'd be. I took the back roads to Kyle's cabin, circling around to the trail behind the property, the same muddy tracks I had spotted days before. I parked far enough back to stay hidden and walked the rest of the way, every step rehearsed in my mind. I moved quiet like I was back hunting deer with Dad as a kid. No sudden movements, no noise, just patience. Through the trees, I spotted the cabin. The windows glowed with soft yellow light, but it was what I heard next that froze me. Laughter. Lindsay's. Not polite, not the hollow kind she'd been giving me lately. This was genuine, carefree, and far too intimate to mistake. I crouched behind an old cedar stump and listened. Kyle's voice joined hers, low and easy, like this wasn't the first time. "You sure he's still buying that Haley story?" Kyle chuckled. Lindsay laughed. Hook, line, and sinker. My chest tightened. I gripped the bark of the stump, grounding myself, forcing down the rage that was threatening to erupt. But I held steady. I needed more. I waited until darkness fell fully before circling closer. From the side of the cabin, through a thin gap in the curtains, I could see them. Lindsay curled up next to Kyle on the couch, wearing the same flannel she'd once bought me as a birthday gift. Kyle poured her a glass of wine, and she took it like they were celebrating something. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Every word, every touch, I captured in quiet silence. This wasn't about catching her anymore. This was about finishing it. I backed away, careful not to step on brittle twigs. I wasn't ready to reveal myself yet. No, I had something better planned. When I got home, I didn't sleep. I sat up all night at the kitchen table reviewing the footage, every second of it confirming what I already knew. But now, I had more than suspicion. I had undeniable proof. Yet, what surprised me wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how numb I felt. Maybe it was the weeks of buildup. Maybe it was how deeply I already knew she'd crossed this line. Either way, by sunrise, I was calm. Angry, yes, but focused. Later that morning, Lindsay walked through the front door carrying grocery bags like she hadn't been out betraying our vows hours earlier. "Thought I'd make us breakfast," she said, setting the bags down. I forced a tired smile. "Sure, that sounds good." She didn't notice the way I studied her, or, if she did, she was too confident now to care. She thought she'd gotten away with it, and maybe that was the worst part. She wasn't even afraid anymore. Just smug. I decided to give her that smugness for a little longer. Let her keep lying. Let her think I was still the oblivious husband she could fool with ease. But inside, the pieces were moving fast now. The decision wasn't about if I'd act. It was when. And when I did, I knew it wouldn't be in the heat of the moment. It'd be sharp, deliberate, and unforgettable. She wouldn't see it coming, and neither would Kyle. I cleared my throat and asked, "By the way, how's Haley holding up?" She seemed stressed last time we spoke. Lindsay hesitated for just a breath. "Oh yeah, she's fine. Just busy with retreat stuff." I watched the lie fall from her lips without a single crack. The calm in me didn't falter. In fact, it deepened. Because now, I wasn't just watching her lie. I was already planning how to turn it into her undoing. I spent the rest of that week setting every piece in place. The plan wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about making sure Lindsay and Kyle felt the weight of every lie, every whispered betrayal they thought I hadn't noticed. I started small. On Monday, I visited Haley. I showed her the footage. She didn't cry. She didn't even gasp. Instead, she clenched her jaw and stared at the screen, eyes burning. She always said I was jealous, Haley said bitterly, staring past the screen. Turns out, I just knew her better than anyone. We didn't talk about what it meant beyond the obvious. We both knew it would all come out soon, but neither of us wanted to make it messy for the sake of it. It had to be precise. The next step was the family gathering. Every spring, our families held a lakeside cookout at the old cabin where my father used to take us fishing. Everyone would be there, the whole tangled mess of siblings, in-laws, and childhood friends. It was tradition, and Lindsay never missed it. I made sure this year would be no different. On Thursday, I invited Haley to meet me for coffee under the guise of catching up before the cookout. In reality, we went to the old dock where we used to swim as kids, and I told her my plan. At first, she thought I was joking. "You seriously want to show up with you?" she asked. "In front of everyone?" I nodded. "I don't want to humiliate her," I said, watching the waves lap against the dock. "I just want the truth to hit where it counts. Quiet and sharp." Haley hesitated, but then a slow, almost sad smile crept across her face. She took enough from me already. Let's give her something back. That night, I cleaned up the cabin, put on the old green flannel Lindsay always hated, and sat at the kitchen table, carving out every detail of how the weekend would go. By Friday, Haley and I were ready. When Saturday came, I didn't text Lindsay. I didn't ask if she needed help setting up, or if she'd remembered the pie her mother always brought. I just packed up the cooler and headed out early with Haley. When we pulled up together, side by side in my truck, the reaction was immediate. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Even from a distance, I saw Lindsay by the grill, stiffening at the sight of us. We didn't rush. We got out of the truck like we had every right to be there, which, as far as I was concerned, we did. Haley slipped her arm through mine, and we made our way down to the lakeside like nothing was out of the ordinary. Lindsay crossed the lawn fast, fake smile plastered on her face. "You two came together?" she asked, eyes darting between us. I shrugged. "Figure we catch up. It's been a while." Haley chimed in, cool as a breeze. "Mark's been such a good friend lately." That's all it took to send Lindsay's composure cracking, just slightly. The rest of the afternoon played out like a strange dream. Lindsay tried to insert herself at every turn, making small talk with me, with Haley, even with family members she usually ignored. But Haley and I stayed close, always just a little too coordinated to be casual. When the sun started dipping low and everyone gathered around the bonfire pit like they always did, Lindsay finally snapped. "Mark," she called loud enough for the whole family to hear. "Can I talk to you alone?" I turned slowly. Of course. We stepped away from the fire, just enough for the murmurs to start behind us. "What's going on?" she hissed, eyes blazing. "Why are you parading around with Haley like this?" I kept my voice calm. "Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing. Except replace Haley with Kyle." Her face drained of color. She blinked, mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words and coming up empty. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked back toward the fire, but not before adding quietly, "Don't worry. I'll let you finish your little retreat skits with him. Just not on my time." The silence behind me was more satisfying than any screaming match could have been. Back at the fire, Haley caught my eye and gave a subtle nod. We were almost there. All that was left now was the final blow, and I planned to deliver it without raising my voice once. The morning after the bonfire, the air felt different. The lake was calm, glassy, like it knew what was coming. I sat on the dock, sipping coffee, watching as Haley skipped stones across the water. Neither of us said much, but the silence was comfortable, necessary even. We'd done enough speaking last night without words. Lindsay hadn't stayed long after our little exchange. I saw her pack up early, storming out under the pretense of feeling unwell, but everyone knew better. Word spreads fast when you live around the same lake for generations. By breakfast, I bet half the town would know about Kyle, even without me saying a thing. I wasn't sure if it made me feel better or worse. Just empty mostly. Later that afternoon, I was back home trying to piece together what I'd say to Lindsay when she inevitably showed up. And like clockwork, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find her standing there, hair a mess, eyes red, holding a pie dish from the gathering like it was a peace offering. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside, letting her in. I had no intention of giving her the satisfaction of knowing whether I'd cooled off or not. She put the dish on the counter and turned to face me. "Look, Mark, I know you're mad, and maybe I crossed some lines, but I don't think you understand everything." I raised a brow. "Then help me understand." She started pacing, wringing her hands. It wasn't like I planned for any of this to happen. "Kyle and it just started after She stopped herself, eyes wide like she just realized the weight of the words tumbling out. "After you read Haley's journal, I finished for her." She flinched. "You thought I'd betray you because of something Haley wrote in a journal when she was a teenager? That's what pushed you into Kyle's arms." Lindsay tried to recover, shaking her head. "It wasn't like that. I felt like you were pulling away, and then when I found that journal, I didn't know how to process it." I stared at her, trying to decide if I was angry, sad, or just tired. Maybe all three. "So, instead of talking to me, you slept with my best friend?" Her lower lip trembled. I didn't mean for it to get serious. I thought maybe it would make me feel better, make us stronger somehow. I laughed, bitter and hollow. "Stronger? Lindsay, you've been sneaking off to a fishing cabin with Kyle, while telling me you were planning family weekends." She stepped closer, reaching for my arm. "Mark, please, I can fix this. We can fix this." I pulled away. "There is no we anymore." Her breath caught. "So that's it? You're just giving up on us? On everything we built?" I pointed to the door. "No, you did that. I'm just making it official." She blinked back tears, but I felt nothing. Not even pity. The storm she stirred up was hers alone now. I let her stand there, desperate and small, in the middle of the kitchen we'd remodeled together. "Please," she whispered. "I love you." I shook my head. "No, you love the version of me you could control. But that man doesn't live here anymore." I motioned toward the door again, firmer this time. "Go stay at the cabin. Or with Kyle. Wherever. But you're not staying here." Without another word, she grabbed her keys and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and leaned against the counter. There was no relief, no rush of victory. Just quiet. Maybe that was the best I could hope for. The next steps wouldn't be easy, but at least now they'd be mine alone to take. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.